One of the defining characteristics of our current culture is the lack of purpose or direction with which many people live their lives. They may be quite busy, but they really have nothing of any permanent value to live for. For some people, for example, life consists mainly of weekend parties and getting drunk. For others, it's the endless cycle of going to a dead-end job every day, then coming home to several hours of mindless television shows, going to bed and arising to repeat the same drudgery all over again. Relationships in such a life tend to be shallow and temporary. They can be pretty lonely. Whatever the details, the long-term effect is the same. We live out our days without any sense of a grand purpose for our lives, so we reach the end faced with the same depressing question: is that all there is? There's an intriguing New Testament passage that addresses this phenomenon directly. It reads, "You were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your aimless conduct received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot." Notice the phrase aimless conduct. Other translations render it futile way of life or empty way of life. The idea is that of a life that is being squandered in pursuits that provide no enduring legacy, the very kind of existence that defines the lives of so many people today. Peter argues that this aimless existence is not inevitable. Life can be an enriching experience, one that is well worth living, but we have to know how to make the transition from one to the other. But before we talk about that transition, notice that Peter informs us how our life got into such a rut to begin with. He says we received this aimless conduct by tradition from your fathers, or expressed another way, handed down to you from your forefathers. In other words, we live this empty kind of life because that's what we grew up with. That's all we know. Look closely at your own life. How many times have you caught yourself saying or doing something just like one of your parents used to do? And you do this despite the fact that you were so determined not to end up like your parents. Let's face it, behavioral inheritance can be just as strong, just as powerful as genetic inheritance. And it's not just our parents who played a role in how we turned out. Think of all the other people in your younger years who had an influence on your character. People such as your schoolmates, your teachers, aunts, uncles, cousins, your neighbors, television stars, none of whom were perfect. We're born into a world that is less than ideal, so it's no surprise that we end up at least a little twisted along the way. So does this mean that I'm doomed? That it's someone else's fault that my life is the way it is and there's nothing I can do about it? No, not at all. Notice that Peter says we were redeemed from this way of life with the precious blood of Christ. Okay, you may be saying at this point, now you lost me. How can the death of some Jewish guy 2,000 years ago have any possible connection with the condition of my life here in the 21st century? I don't get it. Okay, that's a fair question. There's a lot more I could say about this, but here's the short answer. Look again at that word redeemed in this verse. It means literally ransomed. In other words, the death of Christ is a ransom that God paid to set us free from this dead-end life that we're held hostage to. Think of it this way. If we were programmed by our upbringing to live this empty way of life, the death of Christ is God's way of deprogramming us, of showing us that those chains that tie us down are not permanent nor fixed. We have a greater purpose in this life, and the self-sacrificial death of Christ points us in that new direction. So if you're tired of the aimless life that you're living, and you long for something more satisfying, think about what Peter is saying in this verse. Take a closer look at what Jesus did for you and ask yourself if there's a message there for you, an example for you to follow. Compare that to the stale, self-centered habits that you inherited from the past, and I suspect you will find that there's really no comparison. God is giving you a way out. Please take advantage of it while you can. I'm David King with another episode of Beyond Grasping. Have a great day.